and my family are what they call the working poverty poor. And energy assistance comes in handy because it gives us a little boost in the winter. It gives us a little extra money. It pays for basically half of our 1-month heating bill. Not even, actually.
Roxanne Flugum rents a 4-bedroom home in this Austin neighborhood with her husband and 2 children. Last year, energy assistance gave her $100. That paid only a third of January's bill. That might not sound like much, but Roxanne says without the extra cash, her family would be over the edge.
They'd have to come and shut us off. I wouldn't be able to pay my heat bill. I couldn't do it. I wouldn't have the funds to do it.
In rural Minnesota, most residents get their heating fuel out of a tank. Dozens of propane tanks dot small towns, and fuel gets delivered by truck a few times a year. But last month, prices skyrocketed.
Well, the cost of propane is driven by demand, actually, and we've had an unusual cold heating season. It started early. There was a heavy crop drying season ahead of the home heating season. And in a lot of the areas of the country, propane is a highly used commodity because they don't have access to other types of heat sources.
Propane customers can usually contract with their dealers in the summer and get a low price for the whole year. But some people can't come up with a full year's payment all at once, and they have to pay higher monthly rates in the winter. Jan Reed says he's had to cut people off.
We have a lot of people, not only old people, but younger people that have fixed incomes, and we just have to, what we try to do, if we know about it, is we try to accommodate them any way we possibly can by arranging so that we can help them pay their bills. We try to get them on a budget type of arrangement where they can pay monthly.
Linda Laris' organization provides assistance for folks who can't pay their energy bills. She tells the story of a senior citizen on a fixed income. The woman needed fuel but already owed money to her vendor.
And she was concerned that the vendor would not release any more until that was paid. And she had just so much money, and she says, you know, I might have to make a choice between my fuel bill and buying groceries.
Many people blame the oil companies for price gouging. Jan Reed says his company's not making any money off of the current high prices.
Nobody likes high prices. We don't like high prices. Actually, it's detrimental to us because our margins are so many cents a gallon. And the cheaper the price of gas is, the more volume we sell, so the more money we make.
Linda Laris agrees that most small fuel dealers are willing to work with customers, but there's a limit.
Utility companies are not social agencies. They will cut you off. And it doesn't matter if there are children in the home. Many people think, well, I have children. Doesn't matter.
Thanks to our Austin correspondent, Kevin Hansen, for putting that story together. Now, over to Ken Stone for more.
Thanks, Kathy. Here to talk about heating assistance at both the federal and local level, Mark Kaczynski. He's Director of Low-Income Energy Assistance Programs for the state of Minnesota. Mark, thanks for coming. Compare this winter at this stage of the game to last year or previous years. Worse, better, the same?
Well, this winter is much colder than last year, and tack on the top of that, very high fuel prices. It's affecting people quite a bit.
How many people are we talking about who generally need some sort of fuel assistance statewide? How many households?
We're talking about 100,000 households.
Okay. Are you also worried about the length of the winter? Is there a certain point where you start wondering, gee, it's not just cold now, but it's still March or it's still April? I mean, at what point are you worried from a money point that, gee, we're just not going to have enough funds to make it through, whatever?
We actually worry about that all the way through the middle of May. So, because when it comes down to March and April, your utility companies are starting to look at the cold weather rule and look at the possibility of turning people off. And that's when we have a lot of metropolitan people and people on regulated gas.
Now, the way I understand it, utilities can't cut a household off in the middle of the winter, is that right? But those rules do not apply for, say, somebody who gets fuel oil or propane?
Right, correct.
Do you have any idea? Is there any way for you to figure out how many people are getting cut off? Or?
No, actually we don't have those figures, and those figures are very hard to get. We just hear it by people calling in, just saying they don't have any electricity or gas or fuel.
Let's talk about the typical family. Who's getting help? How much help do they get?
Typical family would say a family of 4 that makes about $15,000, $14,000, and they might get $700 in fuel assistance.
Okay, is there a rough breakdown between the working poor? I mean, how many of these people have jobs and just can't afford to pay it? How many of these people are already on assistance?
About 39% of our people actually have some kind of wage income, what we call them the working poor. They're not on any kind of other type of assistance programs.
Let's talk about the piles of money that are out there. Senator Wellstone, Senator Grahams, a number of other senators are asking for the release of money. There's also some state money. Where are the different piles of money?
Well, we took a 25% cut in federal funding from last year. And with that, we have about $38 million federal money. And the governor appropriated $1 million last year for the program, plus an additional $9 million contingency funds, which has kicked in right now.
So would that $9 million roughly make up for the 25% cut in the federal funding that you received?
It roughly does, yes.
A lot of people would also be asking about, well, what about the heat share program? You know, they pay a couple of bucks per month on their electric bill. I mean, how much money does that raise?
The heat share program raises almost $2 million a year statewide, and people do apply for that. Many people that receive assistance from us and also receive crisis money from us also try to tap into the heat share because they just can't make it with our money alone.
How many years have you been doing this?
I've been doing this since about 1980.
Is there a story that you've heard recently this year that makes you stop, even though you've been doing it for 15, 16 years?
Well, I actually have a couple stories. One is got a call from, personally on my telephone, I don't know how she got it, but a call from a single family mother in central Minnesota who had applied for energy assistance, was going to go in to fill out the application, and then was caught in a snowstorm. For a week, couldn't get out of her house, and at that time I received a shut-off notice. And then by the time the agency was going to go out and take an on-site application, they couldn't get to her house to take. So everything was done over the telephone, and negotiation had to be worked out with the utility company. And then we got a call from an elderly household out in western Minnesota whose furnace kicked off. They ran out of fuel, but there was no way a delivery man could get to their house. They were snowed in.
All right, thank you very much. Good luck for the rest of the winter. I hope it doesn't last too much longer. Next up, Kathy and the power of the media to get it wrong.
Really doesn't have much influence, why would politicians spend millions of dollars on advertising? So, what are we seeing in the media these days? Well, this past week, we saw hours of live coverage of a carjacking involving a missing child, which turned out to be a hoax. We saw an interview with the shoplifter allegedly hired by that Roseville family, except he wasn't the right person. We saw a network pay a grocery store chain $5 million because the TV company lied to get its reporters on staff. Kit Borgman is news director at WCCO AM Radio. Professor Clay Steinman teaches communications at McAllister College in St. Paul. Brian Lambert is media critic for the St. Paul Pioneer Press. Well, Brian, you must have been sitting back with the rest of us watching everyone and their mother go live on Friday with the carjacking. Everyone had their live trucks out. Some stations had crawls going across the bottom of the screen. It's not unusual that everyone wanted to get the story first, but what really struck me was no one really had much of anything to go on.
Well, I mean, it seemed like everybody was trying to provide a genuine public service here. I mean, it's one of these moments where, you know, they pay me to criticize the media, but you think, what other response would you have in this situation? I mean, if the call goes out through the authorities that this carjacking is legitimate, this seems to be a perfectly legitimate use of the media. Let's help find it.
Is that the media's role in this, though?
Maybe it doesn't describe that way in journalism schools, but I'm not going to criticize it.
I'm not so sure that that's why they go about doing what they're doing. There might be some public service motivation, but I think that most media outlets these days, they're part of these huge conglomerates that have to have these spectacular bottom line reports each quarter for Wall Street. And so they're more interested, I think, in showbiz than they are in information. One of the things that television does that no other medium does is it goes live. And I think they have an incentive to go live to show off why you should watch their news rather than read it in your newspaper.
I think it's really probably a little bit of both, because we didn't report the story until the Minneapolis police called us and asked for our help in giving the description of the vehicle and the license plate number. We do things like that. We do things like that all the time on CCO, and this was the first we'd heard of this, and we got it on the air immediately. And our objective at that point was to get the word out, hopefully have this car found. At that point, we were relying on the police, believing, as the police did, that this was a legitimate carjacking, and that this child could very well be in danger. And we were hoping to be the first to report. We found her. You know, somebody called and told us we found her. So sure, there's a little bit of that, but we didn't have any reason to doubt it, as long as the police didn't have any reason to doubt it. And we were all over that story, covering it from the angle of the command post. We had somebody at the home of the mother. We couldn't find, there were a lot of mysteries, a lot of unanswered questions all day long. And yet the police kept telling us, you know, that this was, we had to get the word out, we have to find this. At one point, I believe the police even told reporters this was a life-threatening situation. We had to take it seriously. We couldn't do anything else, as far as I was concerned.
You know, I mean, the police have been, the role of the authorities is worth examining in the Richard Jewell case,
Yes.
and the case of the two Dallas Cowboys football players.
Right.
And in each of those things, the reporters, to a certain extent, followed the lead of the authorities, followed their best sources, followed people. I mean, the Jewell thing became a whole other circus with all the competitive pressures that go on in this thing that turns us into this kind of mass lunacy. But the authorities in all of these cases legitimized, you know, the suspects involved.
So we're being used by authorities.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it's not such a big deal in this case. It's more of a big deal in the Jewell case and in the Dallas Cowboys case. Much bigger deal in other political events that have occurred in the last 20, 30 years. I think reporters need to know when they should question the police. Not that the police are necessarily trying to pull the wool over anyone's eyes, but they're not necessarily reliable sources on every issue.
Well, in this particular case, the police were behind closed doors with the uncle, trying to get the truth out of him, and we respected their need to talk to the people involved. Meantime, we had to decide what we were going to do. Drop back from the story or continue reporting the description of the car, the license plate. If we had to err, I would rather err on the side of caution, just in case.
Let's switch gears here just a little bit. The shoplifter suspect hoax story that CCO TV ran. There's a couple different things to chew on here. One was
Only two?
a number of different things. The producer at CCO TV ran with this story, and it came from a tabloid TV show.
Right.
Brian?
Mistake number one. Well, this is the, you know, when people complain about the media, well, you know, everybody may be media, but not everyone in the media is a journalist. And I doubt that CCO television is going to make the mistake again of taking, of swallowing whole a story that comes from one of these tabloid things. But it does speak to this intense, you know, kind of psychotic business of scoop pressure and competitive pressure.
They may not be willing to swallow it whole, but I think there's a reason that they're taking stuff from Extra, and I think it's because, unfortunately, the line between what we might like to consider legitimate journalism and tabloid journalism is getting narrower and narrower, and it has to do, again, with these competitive pressures.
Well, I also think it points up the downside of outsourcing. I mean, you hire an outside independent producer. You don't know them. You don't know their work. You can't vouch for them. As WCCO TV said, we didn't hire him, and we shouldn't have trusted him.
We just used their material.
We just used their material. Yeah.
Whatever happened?
They've learned, I'm sure.
You know, I remember growing up, my mentor was John McDougall over at KSTP, and he used to pound into my head, always double check every fact that you went with. What happened to double checking, Kit?
Well, things like this will make them double check the next time around. I think these are wake-up calls. There's no question about that.
I think CCO TV then turned Dave Wildermuth to correct the story, to get it right. And as Dave said, that if you are a professional journalist, you've usually been doing this long enough that little lights go off that there's something wrong with the story that was being told, in this case, by the hoaxer. But you know, what you say is absolutely true. I mean, we are too prone at this moment to grab this stuff from wherever it comes from if it looks like a hot lead.
To be first.
Also, it has to do, I'm sorry.
But as a journalism professor, though, what do you tell your kids when you see something like this?
Well, everyone makes mistakes, and mistakes are going to happen, but people can be more careful. What I was taught as a journalist, my editor told me, don't assume anything, right? Check and double check. But I think the larger question here is, why why do the media spend so much time on these kinds of stories rather than other kinds of stories? And I think they do because they're sensational, they're not substantive, but they're also not going to offend anybody. And so it helps them bring in the audience they want to deliver to advertisers.
Food Line, the Food Line settlement with ABC. That's a really very interesting story. I'm sure you'll be talking about that in your classroom. This is where ABC was sued by the Food Line grocery store chain. They sent in some ABC employees. They did an expose. Evidently, allegedly, Food Line was selling tainted meat and expired food products. They sued, and ABC lost, and this was an undercover sort of a situation, and the Food Line company won on fraud and trespassing using that instead of libel. So as a news director, Kit Borgman, what did you think when you saw this settlement?
Well, I thought the implications were chilling. I think that some of the best stories that have ever been done have been used with undercover investigative techniques. I think sometimes we get loose and a little bit too careless in the use of hidden microphones and hidden cameras and all. But I think some of the best stories, in the interest of the public, have been uncovered this way, where they would never, the truth would never have come to light any other way.
But the ABC employees lied to get in there.
Lied to get in because they pretended they worked there.
You know, private corporations are not, they're quite different than the government. The government is required on most issues to tell us as journalists tell journalists what they need to know. Private corporations are not. They don't have to give out any information. They don't even have to let you on their premises to do the story if they don't want to do it. I was doing some research on Procter & Gamble, and the people there told me, we're not going to tell you anything unless it helps us. Right? So how are journalists supposed to get into these stories?
And yet what these private companies can do in this case can have a dire effect on the public at large.
Terrible, because they have all this money that they can use to sue.
But what about the ethical questions, though?
Well, ethical questions, I mean, that's the appalling part of this, I think, to journalists, is that the jury never saw the finished piece, never had a real sense of the context of the public benefit that was served by this story, and it has to be weighed. It's a provocative issue. It deserves a lot of discussion. But they're washing meat with bleach and selling it to people.
Yeah. I think the message, in effect, in this ruling was it doesn't matter whether or not it was the truth. You just can't get it that way, and that is a debatable issue. But I think that when an issue so overwhelmingly is in favor of the public interest, I think the jury should have been able to see the report and judge for themselves.
Always a good time with you. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Well, next up, viewers react to a Newsnight debate on gay marriages.
You're talking about rewriting 6,000 years of human history here, Scott. I mean, this would be like throwing out the democratic political system.
I think those slippery slope arguments are more about fear than about information about the subject. Because really, there's nobody out there advocating for incestuous marriages, for polygamous marriages.
Sure there are. In fact, they've existed in this country far more than gay marriages have.
Well, it's certainly not a hot topic over at the Capitol.
Well, that was Scott Cooper from the Gay and Lesbian Community Action Council and Daryl McKegney from the Minnesota Family Council. They were debating whether the state legislature should pass a law banning same-sex marriage. Now, obviously, McKegney wanted a ban. Cooper didn't. We let them go at it for several minutes and then asked for viewer input. And boy, did you put in more calls about this subject than any other in Newsnight history. Literally hundreds. They were almost evenly split for and against the ban. Here's a basically representative sample and a word of warning. We didn't sanitize the responses.
I just saw your show on gay marriages, and I am adamantly opposed to it. I feel that the gay and lesbian groups will not accept society's definition of family, and I feel they eventually will have to accept it or go against society in general. Thank you.
Gay and lesbian marriages are no threat to the family. If Daryl McKegney wants to work to strengthen the family, he should work for economic justice and the reduction of the income gap between the rich and the poor.
Your very pro-gay and lesbian stance is the reason so many people will not support Channel 2 financially. I am one of them.
About gay marriage, I'm all for it and for legalizing it. Thank you very much.
I think it's just absolutely ridiculous that you people would even be dignifying the thought of same-sex marriages. It's just pitiful. You got one guy on the station that's doing pretty good, but the other one. I suppose he's just some two-bit queer.
I am a straight, married, elderly woman. I'm very much in favor of gay marriages because I believe it would stabilize families, and I certainly believe in the constitutional statement that full faith must be given to the contracts of another state. Therefore, when Hawaii allows them, they should be allowed in Minnesota.
By the way, we checked with Scott Cooper before we decided to go ahead and air that one call, and he said he wanted people to hear what others were thinking and that we should use the call. So here's the comment line number, 612-229-1430. Let us know about the other subjects we've covered too. The media, home heating prices, whatever, 612-229-1430. If you want to give us your first name and the city where you live, we'd love to credit you with your opinion. Well, finally, tonight, the weather forecast, it just does not change much this time of year. Mostly cloudy in the west with light snow by the afternoon hours, increasingly cloudy in the east as the day goes on. Highs from the single digits above 0 up north to about 10 down south. As we go tonight, if you can't beat it, join it. That's the idea behind the St. Paul Winter Carnival, and it's not a bad idea either. Here's the ice sculpture contest. Looks pretty, at least from inside our nice warm studio. Good night.
Newsnight Minnesota is made possible by the contributors to the Power of Two Campaigns Program Fund, with major grants from the Blandin Foundation and the McKnight Foundation. Tonight's broadcast of Newsnight Minnesota is presented in part by Norwest Bank, contributing to the growth of the Twin Cities through support and community service. Cargill, supporting Minnesota's tradition of community service. And by the attorneys of Briggs & Morgan, providing a broad range of legal services to business, individuals, and government entities.
You're off to the Bahamas with Trailside, up next. Thursday, tapes rolling on the girls of the gay 90s.
Ever since I was a little boy, I knew I was going to be a drag queen. I just became a life-size Barbie doll.
Bras, high heels.
Pack it all in there, Mama.
I'm getting into strange areas here.
Tapes rolling Thursday night at 7:30 here on Channel 2. Be sure to watch Tapes Rolling so you can find the answer to this week's trivia contest question.
Monday night's broadcast schedule is brought to you in part by Deluxe Corporation, providing integrated payment services and information solutions to financial institutions around the world. The Bayport Foundation, supported by Anderson Corporation. The First National Bank of Hudson, community banking in western Wisconsin, and now open in Woodbury. And by the members of Channel 2.
Enter the world of National Geographic. Hawaii, uninhabited for millions of years, this primordial paradise lost its innocence when